welcome back, folks. This is Corey.
And this is Dave getting over COVID.
This is Scott. Praising Satan.
Praise Satan.
Indeed.
Okay, we've gotten that out of the way. So welcome, Musical Shenanigans. Dave, why don't you fill us in your COVID-laden sexy voice of what it is we do here.
Yeah, my wonderful vacation that turned into an infection. So anyway, here's what we do on this show. What we have done is we have taken the Rolling Stones list of top 500 albums of all time. We have randomly selected 192 of those albums. We seeded them into a bracket, and we pit them head to head. We talk about them, we debate them, we vote on them. 2 albums go in, 1 album goes out, and we are going to keep doing this until we come up with our own personal opinion on what we think is the greatest album of all the time. Fuck Rolling Stone. That's the premise of the show. If you haven't figured that out by now, you really haven't been listening for very long because we've been doing this for a while. Yeah. In fact, we've been doing it so long we have a twebsite. Corey, you wanna tell them about the website?
Yeah, so go to musicalshenanigans.coretwist.com. That's CORTWIST.com. It is basically a landing page with the listing of all of our shows, all of the albums we have covered, and if they happen to have a separate supplemental page of notes, not all of them do. Not yet. That's where you can find them. You can find links to all the shows and just a good overview of what you will find in that show, including what we do in the middle.
Yep. And we're also on Instagram and elsewhere on social media. I don't think we're on Threads yet, right? We're not on Threads, I don't think. But
no, we're not there yet.
But we gave up on the bird train turned X a while ago, but we are at least still on Instagram. What's the Instagram handle again?
Musical Shenanigans Podcast. Just look for Musical Shenanigans.
Corey will refresh his memory and drop that in post edit.
It's
on that webpage. It's right at the opening paragraph of the webpage. Follow us on Instagram, and there is a link.
Look for the link, Jimmy. Look for the link.
Follow your interweb links. There you go. Do we have anything else we'd like to cover before we start?
So many things.
Well,
but we were not going to.
Oh, okay. I was about to say we had nothing. Right. I thought you had this great list that you were going to jump into. No, we've got
tons of things, but we're not going to get into them.
Yes.
Then we won't.
All right, go.
So let's go into round 1. In this first matchup, we have done it again where we have 2 very distinct and contrasting styles colliding in the Thunderdome. The first contender is dark and brooding heavyweight band My Chemical Romance with their haunting concept album The Black Parade, an emotionally charged roller coaster that rivals Dante's little tour with Virgil through a place just slightly hotter than Florida right now. Taking on My Chemical Romance are the B-52s with their debut self-titled album, packed with groovy beats, quirky vocals, and club beats mixed into something of a retro-futuristic vibe. Think Jetsons meet 50s, 60s sci-fi B-movies with beehive hairdos and all spinning under a disco ball. We begin with the boys of My Chemical Romance, MCR to the kiddies, with their theatrical album, The Black Parade.
Can't believe you brought up Thunderdome and I forgot to do my Thunderdome joke. God damn it.
I'm sorry.
We don't need another hero. Sorry.
Well, at least we've got that from Scott.
Yeah, there you go. You're welcome.
The late Tina. God rest Tina's soul.
My Chemical Romance. I will start this. They formed in New Jersey in September of 2001. Put pin in that. They are considered to be an influencer rock band of the 2000s and a major act in pop rock. So going back to September 2001 sounds familiar. Well, they formed because of 9/11.
Never knew that.
It influenced frontman Gerard Way to start a band after that. So the first album called I Brought You My Bullets, You Brought Me Your Love. And they gained popularity with that album by playing out in Jersey and grew their fan base on, wait for it, MySpace.
Shit, it was 2001.
They grew a fan base on MySpace. So fast forward to 2003, and they're now on Reprise Records. They're opening for Green Day on their American Idiot tour. Slight note here, we did talk about Green Day and American Idiot on a show called God Save the Queen, released in February of 2022. You can find it on our webpage. Sorry, cheap plug. So, in talking about Green Day and American Idiot, it's the perfect segue to setting up today's album, The Black Parade, as it is also produced by Rob Cavallo, that had done Green Day's American Idiot. It is a concept album. The basic gist of the album is that it revolves around a character called the patient that dies, like right in the second song, experiences the afterlife, and then reflects upon his life. This album gave them their first #1 single with the Welcome to the Black Parade. And it's a very, very cool video, by the way. That will be in the notes whenever they get posted. The video was also shot by the same director that did Smells Like Teen Spirit. So if you see the video, they all dress up in these black marching band outfits. And from far, it looks like they're wearing like the Bone outfits. It's very, very cool. They took this marching band bit just one step further. In August 2006 in London, they were scheduled to play, and someone came out before they came on and said, sorry, My Chemical Romance can't make it tonight. There's this other band that's playing in their stead called The Black Parade. Of course, the audience starts getting really hostile, only to find out that it really is the same band. They're all dressed up in the marching outfit. Since that day, Gerard Way has been dressing up as that band leader, as a sort of persona that he takes on stage. It's very much like Sgt. Pepper sort of bit, even to the point of Pink Floyd, of the role that Geldof played. And then just one little fun fact. At a festival, Slayer actually performed before they did. It's not like they opened, I guess they were just more popular at the time. And then the Slayer fans bottled them. They did not like them as compared to Slayer.
There's a shock.
And Gerard Way calls it their greatest victory as a show.
Hell yeah. Hell yeah. This album has kind of a weird connection to me personally. Back in 2006, I had brain surgery. And while I was recovering from it, I saw this video which had premiered on MTV. And I'm laying there in a morphine haze being pounded with the Black Parade, and it kind of embedded itself in my cortex somewhere, and as a result went out, bought the album. Yeah, what was left of it, exactly. They scrambled the fuck out of it. I gotta tell you, it's like somebody stuck their dick in there or something. Fucking did that egg wazzle thing. Yeah. Anyway,
egg wazzle.
I don't even know what that means, but it made me laugh.
Or, it was like a stick, and you put the egg down over the stick, and then you turn it on, and it wazzles around, and it whizzes. What? Stirs it?
No, I don't.
well,
but I'll take your word for it.
No, dude, it was real. Anyway, what did this have to do with the Black Parade? Well, I'm telling you, but Jesus, you got me on this fucking tangent.
You now brought up the egg wazzler.
Rabbit holes, rabbits. Tangents, yes. Eggs. It's Easter? No, Black Parade. Kind of an Easter theme going on there. But anyway, no. So I bought the album, and it's to this day, it's still one of my very favorite albums. Just for what it is. It's funny you had mentioned something about the track "Teenagers" having that Georgia Satellites kind of guitar solo.
That opening guitar rhythm, yeah.
That is one of my favorite songs on the album, though. Because I love that riff.
I actually agree. I actually agree with you.
Yeah.
No, this is. It's funny. There are so many things that I should dislike about this. Mm-hmm. These guys get. I mean, MCR catches a lot of crap because they're emo or goth or whatever category you want to put them in, and yeah, it's easy to make a joke out of that. And of course, Gerard Way is very theatrical, very campy with the uniforms and the whole concept album. And they put Liza Minnelli on this album, for God's sakes, and the uniforms and the costumes. It is all so over the top that it's very easy to ridicule. But the reality is these guys are really effing good musicians, number one, and these are really super catchy, well-written songs, number two.
Mm-hmm.
They are. Absolutely.
It's a fantastic album. There are a few negatives, but those are just, I think, more personal than anything else. I wasn't a fan of MCR before this album. I went back and listened to their earlier stuff, and honestly, I don't feel like they found their footing until this album.
I like some of the older stuff that came before this, actually. I do. But
some of it's okay.
Yeah.
But this is where this band really solidified, and it's fantastic. There are so many different tropes and so many different references in this album that we hear it musically. The opening song, it sounds like In the Flesh from The Wall.
Yes.
Well,
the same kind of chord progressions, the same sort of guitar sound. It's just a hint of it to let you know that, yeah, we're paying homage here in a way.
Yeah, I mean, they were very open that they were heavily influenced by a lot of things, including that album. And the whole, I mean, you mentioned the story at the Hammersmith where the announcer mentioned the band couldn't be here, but they sent this other band along. Well, you mentioned In the Flesh. So there's two separate movements of In the Flesh on the Wall album. You get to the second one, the line is, the Pink isn't well. He stayed back at the hotel, but they've sent us along as a surrogate band. So when Floyd went out and did that tour, the original concept, and I think they quickly abandoned it because it didn't work, they actually had these latex masks made of each of the 4 members of Pink Floyd. And they were the original idea was they were actually going to send 4 other musicians out wearing these masks to pretend to be Pink Floyd for that particular portion of the show. And it didn't work because the mask didn't work right. But it's this whole idea of band A isn't here. We got band B instead, but band B is really band A. They kind of took that from the Wall too.
Agree. Yes. It was
not that that's, but not. I mean, not that that's a bad thing. I mean, like, I don't think
there's nothing wrong with that. It's paying homage. It's paying respect to what influenced them.
Right.
I don't see it as thievery in any way.
No, I agree. No. I agree. I wasn't trying to suggest otherwise.
No.
I was just saying, honestly, I think even the fact that people call this a concept album, it's like, yeah, it ain't not much of a concept. Guy gets sick, cancer, dies, afterlife, boom. Oh, wow, deep story there. Okay, we all do that. So I'm just saying. But then the songs themselves, though, stand out. And as somebody noted, there's a lot of stuff on here that could stand up on their own as singles.
They did stand up on its own. I mean, this album actually produced quite a number of singles. I mean, including Teenagers that Corey mentioned earlier. The Black Parade was a single. The Teenagers was a single. And a lot of these... We've talked about like other rock operas before. I mean, we just talked about The Wall, which is a lot of people characterize as a rock opera. We've talked about The Who's Tommy, which is a rock opera. And a lot of the times, because they're trying to tell a story, what you end up is a lot of brief, intertwined songs that don't really stand up on their own. And this is kind of the exception. Like they managed to tell a story and yet actually come out with songs that do stand on their own, that you could hear without knowing the background of this album and still think are fantastic songs.
Absolutely.
So what would be the difference between a rock opera and a concept album?
Oh, God. I mean, I think, I don't know that there is really like a bright line.
Should they be differentiated?
I would say that a concept album, I mean, this is just my own like armchair definition, but I would say that a concept album is all the songs on the album revolve around a common theme. But a rock opera revolves around a common story where you're actually trying to tell a story from start to finish.
Yeah. You know what? I like that definition.
I do too.
I think that's a good way of differentiating between the two, because a lot of times we call them both the same thing and they're really not.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, in a way... I mean, you could probably debate the semantics. No. I mean, the rock opera is arguably one type of concept album because, of course, the story is a common theme as well. So, to me,
we're splitting hairs.
To me, we're splitting hairs. To me, the concept album is, we talked about Dark Side. Dark Side, all of those songs, to hear Roger Waters tell the story, all of those songs are about different things that cause people to lose their minds. But they don't tell a story from start to finish. The Wall tells a story about a guy losing his mind from start to finish.
Yeah, and for instance, the band Dollskin, their second album, actually, every song on there was related to a flower, title-wise, but that was it.
But no story, right?
But they had nothing to do with anything else. So more concept than, opera type thing. Opera is a story for sure.
So, okay, Queen's A Night at the Opera would be more of a concept.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree
with that. And then
Queensryche's
Operation Mindcrime would be a rock opera.
Operation Mindcrime, or Queensryche's Empire is another good example, because that's really supposed to be a story from start to finish.
Empire, that was a great album.
And there was a little bit of that. Didn't they have wasn't there a bit here that sounded like it was a voicemail? It immediately made me think of the song Empire.
Oh, yeah. You know what that is?
Yes.
So I know the song you're talking about, and what that is, I read about this. So they recorded this album because they wanted it to be dark. Again, it's so easy to make fun of emo bands. Because they wanted this to be dark and brooding, they recorded this in some old house somewhere. Don't ask me the name of it. I don't remember. But it was supposedly haunted. And they moved into the house while they were doing the recording. And Gerard Way said that while they were staying in the house, he would wake up with these night terrors. He created all these little voice memos, like recording like what he'd experienced overnight. And what you're talking about is they took some of those voice memos of him talking about his night terrors and put it on one of the songs.
Oh, yeah, I remember.
Sleep. That. Oh, the name of the song is Sleep. I just remembered.
Sleep.
Yeah.
Yeah, great song.
These terrors. It feels like as if somebody was gripping my throat.
It's kind of the premise for the Foo Fighters movie Studio 666.
A notoriously haunted mansion called the Paramore.
The Paramore. I don't know if Haley Williams was there, but yes.
Well, if she was, maybe it was scary. And I'm not bagging on my girl Haley, no.
With the Foo Fighters, when they recorded Medicine at Midnight album, they talked about how the recording studio might have been, they rented this house and they thought it was haunted and all these different things kept happening. It was all a ruse. It was a setup for the movie, which I thought was brilliant. It was the long game.
That is good.
Going back to this album, like the song Mama, clearly someone wrote it's like, they try to out Go-Go Bordello in a way. And yet that's a song that has like a bit of the Pink Floyd wall twist in there. And then that is where Liza comes in. And right after that, I would say it shifts from like the Go-Go Bordello to like a French song, like something you could have just lifted right out of Cabaret. So it was like,
man.
Using Liza was well played.
Oh, yeah. She was very well used on that album.
In two lines. In two lines only.
Yeah, brilliant. But, again, hats off to the producer there.
Yeah.
Who did produce this?
This was Rob Cavallo.
Rob Cavallo. Okay, that's right.
So, a lot to like here, but as we have learned, no such thing as a perfect album. We have our criticisms, too. So, one thing I will say here, and this is not unique to My Chemical Romance, there is this recurring problem with rock operas, which is the whole idea as Corey, I'm kind of glad we had that little sidebar about how do you define a rock opera, and I said it's about telling a story from start to finish. Well, good fucking luck figuring that out, because whether it's the Who's Tommy or the Wall, or if you don't, the vast majority of rock operas, if you don't know what the story is before you start listening, you are not going to figure it out from listening to the album. And this is another example of that. The story is not really told in a way that's very clear what's going on, and we could probably get into 100 different reasons for that, but there's part of me that wishes bands would stop trying to do this because it almost never works, frankly, as a storytelling device.
And you could say the same thing about musicals. If you just listen to a soundtrack, you're not going to pick up on the story unless every song is really just spelling it out for you.
I mean, the difference there is the musical soundtrack is, and I am not a fan, people who know me know I am not a fan of musical theater, but the difference there is that the musical soundtrack was not designed to stand on its own. It was designed to be a stage piece, a visual piece, and people just like the songs, and so they buy the soundtrack. The rock opera, like the album, is meant to be the storytelling device.
But at least like with The Wall and Tommy, they did put together a visual. They put together movies to help fill in those blanks.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. Now the story still didn't make any fucking sense, but at least you understood the story they were trying to tell, whether it made sense or not.
Correct.
Right. Well.
Okay, and I know you both love Teenagers, and it's a really good song, but I just hear the song She Hates Me. The way they get everybody singing and just the whole like band like group vocal. I was like,
Puddle of Mud?
Why does
was
it
that
make
Puddle
me
of
think
Mud?
of that? Yeah, that's who that was.
Yes, that's who that was. Yeah, God. Well, I don't get the Wes Scanlon thing there, but no, I love the big rock endings they did on this album. It was just like, it was so evocative of that 70s and 80s prog sound to some degree with a big rock ending. And they did lots of big rock endings on this album.
And one thing, I read the NME review of this, and whoever wrote it, like, totally fangirled, was going over the top. Greatest album ever, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, okay, it's good, but scale it back a little. It's like, oh, no, this is going to change everything and all of that. I mean, he goes, oh, yeah, I compare this up there with Green Day's American Idiot and Pixies' Doolittle and Nirvana's Nevermind and just naming all these rock albums. He goes, you got to have these all on the shelf together. I get you. It's good. I will say that. But I don't know. I just felt like it was overdone. Like, okay, someone's a big fan.
I found a great quote by somebody who is clearly not a big fan, and for the record, I don't agree with anything of what this is about to say, but I did love the quote. If I want to listen to retro rock, I may delve into my immense iTunes library and put on a bit of Journey or Cheap Trick. If I want to hear a bit of generic pop punk, like Blink-182, Midtown or Lit usually does the job. If I'm going to listen to some piano-driven pop that uses minor sevenths, some Paul McCartney hits the spot. Then if I fancy some terrible singing, I've been known to enter X Factor shit auditions into YouTube's search bar. Luckily, if I ever want to hear all that at once, I can turn to this 2006 release by My Chemical Romance.
Yeah, I don't agree with that. That's a little too over the top.
That's harsh.
I mean, it's about a fraction there, but it's yeah. I wouldn't
There's
go
some
on.
really good playing on this album.
Oh,
Musically,
100%.
Incredibly good playing.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I said, I don't agree with any of that. Just the quote made me laugh.
Way's voice.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely funny. But I mean, Way's voice does get annoying. I agree with you. And, like I said, not a huge fan of their stuff prior to this album. But, that's just, for me, it was situationally embedded more than anything. So,
I think I mentioned this to you guys too. It somehow this album seems like it was more recent than this. I have to keep reminding myself this was 2006. I don't know why, but it just seems like it was more recent. I'm getting old, I guess.
Or maybe just by the time you discovered it, it could have just been.
No, because I listened to a lot of alt rock radio, and so like when these singles were out, I was listening to them. This is somebody pointed out to me the other day that if they remade Back to the Future set in 2023, they would be going back to 1993. So clearly I'm a lot older than I.
Oh, God, don't say that.
Yeah, we're old.
What a good segue.
Yes. Okay.
Speaking of old, B-52s.
Why don't we talk about the B-52s, Al?
All right. Athens, Georgia, 1976. So the B-52s are a bunch of college kids in Athens get together they actually meet at I don't think they met. They formed at a Chinese restaurant in Athens and hit it off. They go out, find out they all like to play music. They go out, sort of jam around for a while, find some chemistry, and start working on some tunes. They also they get a couple of songs together. They play a friend's house party and they debut their first songs and also debut their very unique look. I mean, we just talked about My Chemical Romance and the uniforms and the campy over the top look. Man, you can't do campy and over the top the way the B-52s did campy and over the top. So everything was sort of secondhand thrift store looking look, lots of wigs. They actually, Kate Pearson talks about going into an Athens thrift store. They found some white fur purses, turned them inside out to turn them into afros, and stuck them on their heads. That was the first wigs for B-52s. They hit it off big at the party. Their big hit at their friend's party. Start working on some more songs and start working on for what will ultimately become their first single, a song called Rock Lobster, which you've probably heard. It is punk influenced. It is surf rock. It is a dance track. I chuckled at this. Ricky Wilson, who was their guitar player, who came up with the original guitar riff, or sort of, well, yeah. So he came up with the original guitar riff, and he introduced the song to the band by coming to them and said, "I've just written the stupidest guitar line you've ever heard." That was the way he announced the fact that he had written this song. So he comes up with this guitar riff. Fred Schneider, who is one of the two lead singers at the time and who does this really unusual, bizarre singing thing where he doesn't quite sing and he doesn't quite sing. It doesn't quite speak. He adds some lyrics that are absurd, that are kind of inspired by Lewis Carroll and Ogden Nash. There's also a heavily Yoko Ono influence. The band has said that Yoko was a big influence for them at the time. And so there's a lot of like noises and screaming and stuff on here that was directly inspired by Yoko. John Lennon, interestingly enough, just a few days before he died, actually gave an interview to Rolling Stone where he said, hearing Rock Lobster was what got me to get off my ass and go back into the studio, because I felt like pop music had finally caught up to what Yoko was doing. So he says he was going to go back in the studio, but then of course he got shot just a few days later. So much for that. The single comes out. The single hits big. It leads them to start playing gigs in New York. Now these kids are living in Athens, Georgia, and they're still broke musicians. So they would literally drive up to New York, play a couple of shows, and drive all the way back just for a few bucks in the exposure. Wow. It was a hit. People in New York loved them. 1979, they finally say, time to make an album. So they fly off to the Bahamas and start recording an album. This album is kind of unlike it's one of these things that nobody's heard anything like it at the time. The opening track is a song called Planet Claire, and it starts with like these 50s and 60s sci-fi sounds, a bunch of nonsense lyrics about a planet where everybody's immortal and no one has a head. Yeah. Theremin, yes, but it gets even weirder because later Ricky Wilson, the guitar player, also plays a smoke alarm. That is one of the instruments on that song.
Nice.
I got a little tripped up there a minute ago when I said Ricky Wilson wrote Rock Lobster, and he came up, and I suggested he didn't come up with a guitar riff, but I was confusing it with this song. He came up with a guitar riff for this too, or he thought he did. It was actually the bass line from the song Peter Gunn by Henry Mancini. You've all heard it. But it was sort of a subconscious thing. He claims he didn't really realize he was doing it. Once it was pointed out to him that it was the same bass line as Peter Gunn, they actually amended the album credits to give Henry Mancini a writing credit on the song.
Nice.
So the album comes out. It is Planet Claire is just one example. The whole album is just like kitschy and hooky and these great harmonies. Cindy Wilson, who was Ricky Wilson, the guitar player Ricky Wilson, his sister Cindy Wilson was the lead singer. She's a fantastic singer. Kate Pearson she would harmonize with. It all just takes off spectacular, and they just go on to have a huge career from here, but nothing sort of as mind-blowing as what comes out with this in 1979.
Yeah, it really was. And you said this on the last show when we talked about the Cars, of it sounds like music from the future. If the Cars were the music of the future, then this album's just damn near intergalactic with its weird sounds and the playful lyrics and talking about outer space and all sorts of just weird shit, weird noises. I mean, the smoke alarm. And it's so campy and fun. It feels like a 1950s, 1960s sci-fi B-movie being riffed by Mystery Science Theater. That's what it feels like to me.
This one is music of the future as taken from like one of those old 1950s documentaries where they predicted the future and got everything wrong. Where everybody's going to have jetpacks and yeah.
Yeah, I love the surf rock on it. You mentioned that Ricky Wilson was a criminally underrated guitar player, and I was like, yeah, actually he was. Fucking brilliant guitarist.
Very innovative. Ricky Wilson used to do this thing where he would play with four strings. He'd take a 6-string guitar, take the 2 middle strings out, and just use the lower 2 strings for the bass and the upper 2 strings for the treble. And as if that wasn't weird enough, like then he would use all these strange alternate tunings on the 4 strings that he had left on the thing. And to this day, you have guitar players that are like, will go back and try to figure out what the fuck he was doing exactly to get some of these strange chords he was coming up with.
Kudos to him.
Kind of the strange things that I can't think of his name right now. Rage Against the Machine.
Oh, Morello. Tom Morello.
With his guitar and getting different sounds.
Yeah, Tom Morello would make his guitars sound like things that weren't a guitar. Ricky Wilson, it was always a guitar, but it was just a guitar that didn't sound the same notes that you would normally expect to get out of a guitar a lot of the time.
Right. Fun stuff, yeah.
He would also occasionally, I think he had one guitar that he had modified to those 2 lower strings, took the tuning keys off from guitar strings and fitted them with bass tuning keys. So he actually had 2 bass strings at the bottom. And
I have seen people do that. One guy does that on an acoustic guitar, John Gomm, but that's another story. Yeah, Corey, you mentioned that this... Okay, I'm going to start that over. Wow, just totally fucking... Corey, you mentioned that... Okay, I got it.
Drugs.
Corey, you mentioned that the Cars album was music from the future. I feel like this is like pop music from the future. All that just to get to that. Jesus Christ.
5 minutes and I added a word.
Hashtag winning. That's me. Fuck.
There are a couple of really amazing moments. There's one moment in this Planet Claire that I mentioned earlier, and then there's another song later where this happens again. There's a moon in the sky called the Moon.
Great name.
And really, it's the stupidest thing. Every other planet that has a moon has a name.
Yeah.
Ours is just the moon.
The moon.
That's fair. That's a good point. There's this moment on both of those tracks where I mentioned Cindy Wilson's vocals. Kate Pearson is playing this sort of old 50s I don't know what kind of keyboard it is. But Cindy Wilson is singing along with the keyboard. And I swear to God, unless you listen closely, it is damn near impossible to figure out which is Cindy Wilson and which is the keyboard. I mean, she is hitting like pitch perfect on every single note that Kate Pearson is playing on the keyboard. It's unworldly sounding, and it's fantastic. These guys, and then I mentioned Fred Snyder. Fred Snyder just kind of did this like talking thing where he's not quite singing, he's talking, but he has a very distinctive voice that is all his own. And
Lobster.
Rock Lobster. Yes. Yeah. I got me a car. It's as big as a whale. Yeah.
Wow. That beats Club.
Yeah.
Oh, kind of David Byrne-esque.
Yeah, exactly. That's another thing about this band is the vocalists all had such unique voices that you could actually isolate their vocals and take them out of context and still know exactly who was singing.
Yes.
Well, okay.
Yeah.
That's what they say, Jimmy.
Whoever put it, it's like it's experimental and fun, and we've had other experimental albums that are just kind of difficult to listen to because they're just too experimental, but this was experimental in a way that they still kept the energy. They still made it to where you could sit through 5-6 minutes of some of these songs that are really long. You're like, yeah, it's not making me want to go get Scott's cheese grater
or slam the door. Yeah,
or slam the door.
You know, there's quirky and there's doing quirky right. They did quirky right. They made quirky fucking funky and danceable and cool and something that, you know, even a metalhead can listen to and go, yeah, that's a good song. Wow, what the fuck's that guitar player doing?
And especially on this album, like when you get to, I mean, we were just like quoting from Love Shack and the stuff off of Cosmic Thing album, which came out in the 80s. By the time they got to that point, there was a sense they were doing the whole thing as a shtick. When this came out in 79, there's nothing that indicates like whether they're serious or not. You knew it was nuts and it was campy and crazy, but you couldn't quite tell like whether it was intentional or whether they were doing a shtick or whether they thought they were making art. I mean, of course they were making art, but you know what I mean.
Yeah. Yes. I was just going to say something nobody's really brought up is that 4 of the 5 members were LGBTQ.
Yeah.
And at that time, people weren't as out as they are now,
especially in Georgia.
You know,
yeah.
But the interesting thing was they were out, like nobody doubted it when you saw Fred Schneider sing, like you knew exactly who Fred Schneider was, but it was never remarked on. Fred Schneider was kind of out doing this thing like, am who I am, you can accept it or not accept it, but I'm not here to talk about it, I'm not here to make a statement.
Right.
He was like a cross between Paul Lynde and Charles Nelson Riley.
That's a very good point, Corey. You know, wow.
And now I'm trying to picture in my head. I'm trying to do a Paul Lynde impersonation of singing B-52 songs.
That love shack.
Oh my God! I got a car. It's as big as a whale.
That's it.
There you go.
But it was almost this kind of like matter of fact of, look, you can just be who you are. And it's not a big deal. I think this was a lot of like queer kids who saw this back in the 70s. It was sort of very much kind of this light in the darkness of, oh, you know what? I can be included and I'm invited to the party too. And there's even this, somebody pointed out in a review I was reading, back to that song, There's a Moon in the Sky Called the Moon. There's a line that says, if you're in outer space, don't feel out of place because there are thousands of others just like you.
Yeah.
Right on.
And that was just it. They weren't defined as that. They weren't defined as, oh, well, that's the gay band.
Right. No. Right. They weren't doing like the like
music. It was just
Village
music.
People. I mean, the Village People were making a political statement. These guys were just being who they were.
Yes.
And I think that was the beauty of them. All right. So we have to at least try to, take some shots at this.
Yeah.
Fred's voice got kind of annoying.
Well, some of the screaming and, it was experimental. I give them that. There's just times you're like, all right, I don't need to hear you scream again, Kate. Please don't.
Those are just me being, kind of but
nitpicky. Yeah.
My impression when I was listening to this is I could totally see being at a house party and dancing and getting all hot and sweaty and having a fantastic time listening to these guys for hours on end. Trying to sit down and appreciate as an album is another matter, though. I mean, if you're not at the dance party, like nobody's putting on the smoking jacket and saying, "Oh, let me put on some B-52s."
You're right. This is another example of this is the kind of stuff that really works better live.
You had to be there, yeah.
Yeah.
And this is the kind of album you put on when you are having that house party, when you are having people over and you want to have people moving and getting up and having some energy. You put the B-52s on.
Yeah. You don't put on that sad emo crap.
Rock Lobster, for as long as it is, and somebody pointed out that Rock Lobster is way longer than you remember if you haven't listened to it in a while. Rock Lobster you can actually sit down and listen to because it's musically interesting enough, actually, that you can listen to it as a standalone piece, whether you're at a dance party or not. The rest of this, not so much.
I don't know. Planet Clear's a great song. I love that song, actually.
I'm not dissing it. I'm the one that put that. I don't remember it being that long, but it wasn't until I'm like, wait, is it still going? And you notice, but you don't really notice. You're right. It's interesting. It keeps your attention.
I saw a radio edit of that song as well. So apparently there were
You weren't the only one.
Versions.
Oh yeah, I mean, plus it was 79, which anything that long was not going to get radio play in 79.
No,
right. You got to break that down to 3:15, dude.
The only thing that got on the radio then was Stairway to Heaven.
Yes.
or Freebird.
Right. There you go. You can have extended jam on Freebird.
The other big criticism of this album, which I'm not the only one to say it, pretty much damn near every review has said it. The last song is a cover of Downtown. So back in the 60s, there was this big hit called Downtown by a singer named Petula Clark. The original is very famous, very big hit. This one is not.
Yeah.
I didn't dislike it as much as I didn't dislike it as much as an awful lot of people based on what I was reading, but man, it is not great. It's definitely a weak point in the album. One reviewer said that, quote, it's as catchily biting as swamp mosquitoes and also as annoying.
That's good. Yeah, slam my dick in the door if I have to hear that again.
All right, so we ready to put this to vote?
I think so.
Send it to hell in a nice way.
All right, so up first, I really enjoyed both of these albums. I was unfamiliar with My Chemical Romance. I think I'd heard a couple songs, and I've just been like, You got that late 90s, early aughts, nasally vocal sound, but musically, they were amazing. The album was tight, it was eclectic, it was all over the place, it was incredibly well done. On the other hand, we have the B-52s that really helped move a lot of the new wave into the direction it went. A lot of the quirky sounds, a lot of the dance beats that they came in that were making it for the clubs and everybody else to kind of grab that sound and extend it and make it their own. And the other day I had to basically just flip a coin, so I'm going to give it to the B-52s. Dave?
I mean, I did like the B-50. I do like the B-52s. And there is a lot to love about the B-52s album. Again, though, it's not... If we're judging this based on what is the best album, again, I can't sit down and listen and appreciate this thing as an album. And My Chemical Romance, I definitely could. So based on that criterion alone, I think I've got to go with Black Parade.
Okay.
All on you, Scott.
It's all on you, dude.
Yeah, it's all on me. I'm just like one of them whores. Yeah, it's all on me. Anyway, right, okay, yeah. No, Black Parade. Aside from the way it was presented to me, aside from all that, yeah, like you said, Corey, it's just so fucking well done musically. Oh my God, that's a well played album. Just, I can listen to that over and over. B-52s, not so much. I mean, I appreciate what they did, but I'm going to give this to MCR.
Okay, and we have an upset. The B-52s were ranked at 198. My Chemical Romance was ranked at 361.
Wow.
Kudos to them. Good job.
You win thing. Congratulations. Nah. No, those were both great albums.
They are. They really are.
It was good. Those were fun to listen to again. I enjoyed it. So even the B-52s, because I hadn't heard some of that shit in so long, was like Planet Claire. I forgot how much I really dig that track. It's a great riff. Even though, yeah, it's definitely Henry Mancini. Mancini was the godfather of so many things.
Yes, he was.
All right.
Let's move into our middle discussion.
The middle discussion, which I think is going to be sort of a tee up for our second round as well. So
Yes.
when we get into our second round today, we're going to be talking a little sneak preview. We're going to be talking about a band called the Stooges from the late 60s and into the early 70s. And the Stooges, well, you'll hear more about them when we get to it, but the Stooges were led by a front man, guy by the name of Iggy Pop. To say Iggy was an interesting personality is putting it mildly, and we were talking about this, and Iggy is 76 years old now, and we're getting to a point where fewer and fewer people, frankly, who remember who Iggy was or some of the things he did. And we thought it was sort of worthwhile to maybe like take a pause and introduce people who maybe aren't familiar or who don't remember to Iggy Pop and share some of what we thought were our own personal favorite Iggy Pop stories over the years. So, first of all, a little background. Let's introduce you to Iggy. So Iggy was born James Newell Osterberg Jr. Grew up in a trailer park in Michigan in a 365 square foot trailer. Iggy would ultimately go on to become Mr. Sex, Drugs, and Rock and Roll, just like Keith Richards. And like Keith Richards, you somehow look at him today and say, how the F is this guy still alive based on some of the stuff he was doing? But again, Iggy was born in this trailer park, starts playing drums. 5th grade, he starts playing drums. Originally, he actually got just some rubber pads, glued them to a piece of plywood, and just beat the shit out of him until his parents finally relented, bought him a drum kit. This is how supportive this kid's parents are. They're living in a 365 square foot trailer. They buy him a drum kit and let him set it up in the master bedroom of the trailer. This is not a family with a lot of space to spare.
He was originally playing in the living room, and he had like a really tiny bedroom, just a small bed and a desk. His parents moved into the small bedroom, took out the desk so they could put in a larger bed, so that Iggy could put himself and his drums into the master suite.
Yeah, very supportive.
And out of the living room.
Very supportive.
Yes, incredibly supportive.
So ultimately, he starts to kind of gravitate. Like I said, he's growing up in Michigan, and he starts gravitating towards a lot of blues musicians who are in the Detroit area. He quits high school. He becomes a drummer. He forms a band called the Iguanas with some other young white blues fans. He has already kind of showing this instinct for showmanship. He builds a 7-foot riser for his drum kit just so that he would tower over the rest of the musicians in the band while he's playing.
I love that.
Brilliant.
Yeah, reminds me, Corey, of your milk crate story a long time ago.
That did not work, by the way.
So eventually he meets two other high school dropouts, brothers Ron and Scott Ashton, also a guy named Dave Alexander, and they put together a new band. They rent a house and they form a band called the Psychedelic Stooges. So Iggy decides he's going to become the vocalist, and he becomes Iggy at this point because, again, he had been playing in this band called the Iguanas, and so he named himself Iggy as kind of a tribute to this prior band that he was in. He performs under the name Iggy Stooge for a while, but then eventually changes it to Iggy Pop. There was this kid, Jimmy Pop, in the area who was mentally challenged and would come to all the shows, and Iggy liked the kid so much that he changed his last name to Pop as sort of like a tribute to this kid. The drugs start quickly. Ron Ashton has a friend who is going to school. He's a science student at the University of Michigan, and they're doing experiments on psychedelics. And so he's got access to supplies, and so they will frequently get supplies out of the supply closet from these psychedelics experiments. At this point, you have to understand LSD is still legal. It has not been criminalized yet in this country. Other drugs are pretty easy to come by, but LSD is something you can do without breaking any laws. So they start doing a lot of drugs, start making a lot of psychedelic music. And then Iggy, sort of a key moment in his life, they go to see The Doors. And Iggy is just obsessed with Jim Morrison. And more to the point, the way that Jim Morrison is just engaging the crowd, doing anything to get a reaction from the crowd. Morrison, Iggy Pop described him as out of his head on acid. He's confrontational. Jim Morrison in this particular show is out there deliberately insulting the crowd. And Iggy Pop says, my God, if these guys have a hit record, they can get away with this, so I really don't have any fucking excuse. And he starts basically setting out to be just as confrontational and engaging and reaction as trying to get a reaction as Jim Morrison. They play their first public show in 68. Iggy Pop shows up. He has shaved his eyebrows. He's covered his face in white paint. He's wearing golf shoes, taken a rubber swim cap and decorated it with aluminum foil. And he's wearing what Ron Asheton later described as an old white nightshirt from the 1800s. That's the Stooges' first public performance. The Stooges at this point, they would later go on to kind of be recognized as forerunners of punk, but at this point they're really doing more like psychedelic experiments. Lots of jazz influence. There's Rolling Stones influence. You've got Iggy howling on stage. To give you a taste of this, we just talked about the B-52s playing a smoke alarm. In their first shows, the Stooges are playing instruments like a blender, a vacuum cleaner, 55-gallon oil drums, and a hammer. Iggy also takes the habit of also making sure that he takes 2 hits of acid before every show, which is interesting, but it makes every show pretty brief because basically every show kind of lasts no more than about 40 minutes when Iggy starts getting hallucinations that are too bad that he can't go on anymore.
Maybe 1 hit would have just been enough, you know?
You got to push those boundaries.
If you're getting a sense of Iggy,
like, no.
if you're getting a sense of Iggy Pop so far, you can see where we're going here.
My doctor said take 2 hits and call me in a couple days when you come off of this.
Exactly.
We weren't playing, boys and girls.
The Stooges make an album. They make a second album, Funhouse, which is the one we're going to be talking about a little bit later. By the time they get to Funhouse, almost all the members are using heroin on top of the LSD. The shows get even more chaotic. Off stage, this is what's going on even when they're not on stage. Scott Asheton, they're out driving a tour bus. He's got a tour bus full of rented equipment, and he drives it into a low bridge, taking off its roof and destroying all this equipment that they had rented that they didn't actually own. At one show in Cincinnati...
Oops.
Yeah. Iggy Pop is... One of the things Iggy Pop kind of gets a lot of credit for is inventing the idea of the stage dive. Now, people will debate whether or not he actually invented it, but at least he was clearly one of the first people to do it. So in one show, he actually did a stage dive, and nobody caught him. So
everybody moved out of his way.
So he landed on the floor, cracking his front teeth.
He broke a tooth completely, yeah.
In 1970, he had a show where he smeared his entire body with... He used to play shirtless all the time. He smeared his entire body with peanut butter and then began like pulling gobs of it off and throwing it at the crowd. He would try to provoke people in the crowd. There was one show where there was a guy, he later sort of like apologized for this a little bit. There was an African-American guy at one show, and Iggy would deliberately started hurling like racial slurs at him, trying to get the guy to stab him because he thought it would be interesting for people to see him stabbed on stage. That's Iggy Pop going to any length for a reaction.
That's what you get with the second hit.
That's what you get with the second hit.
Right. I need you to stab me, man.
Yeah, with the first hit, he would have been like, it's probably not a good idea. But that second hit does, you know what? Stabbing would be cool.
Stabbing would be cool.
Sure.
Flash forward, like all bands, eventually they break up. After they break up, Iggy takes up with David Bowie and starts doing a lot of work with David Bowie. But by 73, in between stints with Bowie, people are clamoring for a reunion. And so a lot of the Stooges get back together. They start doing more shows. The drugs start all over again. There was a show in Philadelphia where they actually had to stop 3 songs in because someone threw a jelly sandwich at Iggy Pop's chest, and everyone thought he had been stabbed because they just saw the red jelly all over the page. In 75 is kind of when it hits the cataclysmic moment. The original bassist actually, at the age of 27, dies from his alcoholism. And Iggy says, I gotta get myself clean. He checks himself into a psychiatric institute. I guess they didn't have access to a regular rehab facility. He checks himself into a psychiatric institute to dry out and kind of sort out his life. And then there's a whole lot of shit that happens to Iggy Pop after this. But as we get into some of these stories of sort of best Iggy Pop moments, and believe me, we haven't even gotten to the good ones yet, this kind of sets the stage for who Iggy Pop was. So again, we thought we'd share some of our favorite Iggy Pop moments within that framework. So Corey, you want to go first? What do you got?
Yeah, I will. So, in February of 74, Iggy battles bikers. They're playing it at the Palace. It's actually, I think, in Detroit, where the band finds themselves playing a room full of hostile bikers. And they're throwing bottles, they're throwing all sorts of shit, and Iggy continues to taunt them. During the performance, the tensions between the bands and the group of rowdy bikers, it escalates. to a point of now physical confrontation. So the atmosphere is already charged with energy of the music because Iggy just brings so much energy and he's insane on stage. You take Jim Morrison and, well, give him 2 hits of acid, and here you are. And then at one point, Iggy reportedly made some derogatory comments about one of the bikers' chicks, further fueling the hostility. He was then pelted with beer, whiskey bottles, bras, and shoes. And this was all captured on a release called The Metallic KO. Iggy, undeterred by this onslaught of shit, continues to perform with his trademark wild and uninhibited style. He climbs into the audience and confronts the bikers directly. Okay, amidst the chaos, the Stooges managed to finish their set, but the concert ended in a flurry of violence. Iggy's covered in blood, and the venue is in shambles. I mean, it is a bar fight from, like, what you see in the movies.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's epic.
I wanted to bring this up because we talked about Black Flag last week with Henry Rollins getting confrontational with the audience and just slugfest and getting hit and all that. And you hear it and you go, okay, but Iggy did this first.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
I don't think there's any other precedent of, I mean, Jim Morrison engaged with the audience, but I don't think he actually started a fight with the audience.
I like that.
No,
Yeah.
and you mentioned, Corey, that this was all captured on this bootleg album called Metallic KO. So there's this Lester Bangs for the Village Voice wrote this review of Metallic KO where he said it's the only it's the only rock album I know where you can actually hear hurled beer bottles breaking against guitar strings.
Nice. That is the sound.
And I think of the Blues Brothers when they're playing.
Oh, the chicken wire, yeah.
Right. Yeah. There were nights sometimes at the Mug where I wondered if we'd get that, but never that bad.
No, they weren't. So Iggy would literally start real fights with audience members, and he didn't give a shit who they were or how much danger he could have possibly been in.
Yeah. Well, good segue, because speaking of danger, sorry, so that brings me to my first story, which is Max's Kansas City. So the Stooges back in '73 get booked at a venue called Max's Kansas City, which, despite the name, is in New York, not in Kansas City. Max's Kansas City was this sort of underground club. It was very big, sort of on the seminal punk scene. Lots of famous people hung out there. Andy Warhol, Patti Smith. Debbie Harry was even a waitress there for a while. It was a small place. Stage was small, and they had tables that kind of went all the way right up to the stage. And every once in a while, basically, Iggy would get tired of being confined to the stage, and so he would just go out and walk on the tables. This particular night, he's out walking on the tables. The problem is, this particular night, one of the tables he steps on collapses. Of course, the table is completely filled with glassware from, glasses and those things. Iggy is shirtless. The glasses hit the floor. The glasses all break. Iggy lands on top of all the broken glasses. He's now on the floor. He is pissed because nobody's picking up the glass. He's like begging somebody, come get this fucking glass off the floor. Nobody's doing it. And he's picking up pieces of glass, throwing them down. And because he's angry, he starts like pounding his chest. And sometimes he's got pieces of glass in his hand while he's pounding his chest. And so he's just cutting himself more and more. And at this point, there's actually like a little bit of debate over whether or not he was trying to kill himself. There are actually people there that have said that from what they saw, it seemed like when he was hitting himself with his pieces of glass, because of all the pain, he actually attempted to slash his neck, but just basically, because he was out of it, also missed and just hit himself in the chest. Again, debatable.
The second hit.
Yeah, the second hit. Wow. Yeah, but again, this is one of those. It's a matter of perspective. It's not clear that he was actually intentionally trying to do any of this. They were 20 minutes into the set. Somebody says, Iggy, you got to stop this show, man. You were bleeding like crazy. Iggy says, no, I want to finish the show. So he is shirtless.
The show must go on.
Shirtless, bleeding like crazy, back up on stage. And not only does he continue doing these songs while bleeding out, basically, he deliberately like jerks his body and angles his body so that the blood is squirting onto the audience.
Oh my God! All I think of is Dan Aykroyd doing Julia Childs on SNL.
Yeah. The crew jumps in. They start trying to get the wounds closed by using gaffer tape. So these guys come out with the same tape that they use to like tape up mic cords, and they're trying to put it on top of Iggy's wounds. That's not working. He's still bleeding like crazy. Manages to make it through the whole set, and they rush him off stage into a car, get him to an emergency room. They keep doing shows after that, and for the next 3 or 4 shows, again, he always performs shirtless, so the next few crowds got to see, they didn't get squirted with the blood, but they got to see like all of the bruises and stitches and cuts and everything.
He was punk before punk was punk.
Yes.
That's really what I took away from just who he was. But so when he did try to dry out in the early 70s, Iggy checked himself into a neuropsychiatric clinic at UCLA and was trying to get clean. Get off the coke. And so David Bowie and Dennis Hopper, being friends of his, were like, hey, poor Iggy probably hasn't had any drugs. And they bring him drugs, cocaine, in the hospital. Well, they tried to, but the hospital was like, no, you really shouldn't do that. He's recovering from a fucking addiction to it. And they're like, no, he needs this.
I mean, in their defense, as I said earlier, like when he tried to dry out, it wasn't a rehab facility. It was a psychiatric hospital.
Right.
They claimed that they genuinely did not know he was in there for addiction. They thought he was in there for like some other psychiatric issue.
Wow.
Now how bringing somebody with a psychiatric issue cocaine is a good idea, but...
Sure.
Yeah, you know what that is? That's projection.
Yeah.
Oh, he hasn't had coke in so many days. He must be really feeling, lousy. We need to bring him some coke, because if I went this long without coke, I would need more coke.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, Iggy is he's something of a legend. I think a lot of listeners may not know that the 60s and 70s were so drug fueled in music. Oh man, some of the best music was made by people high as fuck. Just saying. But his over the topness has inspired musicians since then. I mean, the whole punk movement now. A lot of it's so watered down now. There's no anger and violence so much anymore.
Well, and Iggy, Iggy's still making music, and he's largely bailed on punk at this point. I mean, he's doing a lot of jazz influence kind of stuff now, spoken word kind of stuff now. So
he did perform with Måneskin, the Italian rock band. They do a song called "I Want to Be Your Slave," because they also do a cover of "I Want to Be Your Dog" by the Stooges, and they got Iggy to sing it with them. And this is a band. Every member is like in their early 20s, and one of their biggest influences is the Stooges.
That's awesome.
He is today. I mean, we've talked on other shows about how Bob Dylan is kind of like the student of music, and Dylan can kind of quote you chapter and verse of pretty much every the history of every song and artist that's ever lived. Iggy has done a radio show or a podcast, one of the two, I don't remember which. But he is apparently, not only is he incredibly well versed in music history and all of these things, but he is incredibly up to date on new acts as well. So groups like Måneskin, like he loves it. He loves staying up to date on whatever's new and happening. All right, so there you go, folks. There's your little intro to the fantastic Mr. Pop, and
or maybe it's a big intro.
A big intro.
We're talking about Iggy.
It's true.
Big
It's big,
intro.
Iggy.
There's your perfect lead in as we talk a little bit more about the Stooges and that second album that I mentioned.
So let's move into round 2. Race fans, hot rod, motor cars. It's the epic tale of the tortoise and the hare. The hare being the one and only Iggy Pop and the Stooges that we have just been talking about, and with their second album, Funhouse. These true rebels of rock and roll go screaming and screeching down the asphalt with ferocious guitar riffs and with a complete unapologetic attitude. It's a nitro-burning funny card made from junkyard scraps and fueled by pure adrenaline, anarchy, and whatever drugs happen to be laying around. Taking on the hare is the smoothest and coolest hare in the land, Otis Redding, with his third album, Otis Blue. With the perfect blend of rhythm, blues, and soul that navigates across the track like an elegant sports car with an engine made with the best parts and running in harmonic precision and velvety grace. And we start this unbalanced slugfest with the Stooges, roaring down the raceway at top speed and spewing who knows what from every possible opening.
You realize you just took your tortoise and hare analogy and then described them both as hares?
No. Oh, yeah, I guess. Yeah.
You dumbass.
Yeah, you fucked it up.
So he's not really an elegant sports car. Maybe I should have made it like an
Well, you said
elegant coach.
taking on the hare is the smoothest and coolest hair in the land.
Oh, I did do that.
Well,
God
yeah,
damn it.
you did. You did.
Oh, okay.
Wah, wah, wah.
Wah, wah. All right.
Choreographed
Hey.
it.
Nobody, no,
Hey, it's all good.
cut that out. Nobody will notice.
No. I'm gonna leave it. I'm
right.
good. Hey, I fucked it up. I'll own it. That's comedy, folks.
Fun House. It is the second album by the Stooges. Released in July 7th, 1970 by Elektra Records. I remember Elektra. It was initially commercially unsuccessful, but it's since developed a cult following. Like its predecessor, 1969's The Stooges, and its successor, 1973's Raw Power, it is generally considered integral to the development of punk rock, as we've just been talking about. It's often referred to as proto-punk, even. Anyway, so the album, blah. No, it's great. A lot of really cool tracks on it. I mean, the album's, it's like, from start to finish, and in a good way.
We did mention they're kind of experimental and their tie-in with, Dave mentioned, Warhol. Their first album was produced by John Cale of the Velvet Underground. So you want to talk about getting some avant-garde stuff? And we did talk about the Velvet Underground in the show Life, the Universe, and Everything, recorded on February 20th, 2023. You can find it on the website.
Who are we again? What time is it?
This album, we talked about Black Flag coming out and punching you in the face. This one just beats the ever-living shit out of you.
Yeah.
It doesn't stop.
Yeah, it's a boot to the nads right from the get-go.
You're down and unconscious, and they're still beating you.
Oh, yeah. But it was a vibe, as well as, a genre. And it wasn't super popular when it first came out, because it was fringe. And that was about as fringe as you could get, really, back then.
But it beats you in a different way. I mean, it doesn't... Black Flag is a lot closer to what people think about as punk. I mean, most people, when they hear that term, I think Black Flag is more what people picture. Yeah. If you listen to this and you go in expecting a punk album, you're not going to get probably what it is you're expecting. We've talked about this in the past, that in the early days, punk had sort of a different meaning than what it ultimately became. This is, I mean, personally, I think this is a lot more musical than the Black Flag album. The playing on this is tight. Like all the musicians are tight. The mix is tight. You can hear every instrument loud and clear. It's not like crazy distortion. I mean, yes, there are heavy guitars on there, but it's not the beat you over the head with distorted guitars, drum as fast as you can. These guys had sort of a tendency to settle into a groove. Like they would find an interesting musical phrase and just kind of explore it over and over and over. And in fact, one of my criticisms, frankly, is on a lot of these tracks, it is sort of like the same musical movement just over and over and over again for 5 minutes straight, with Iggy doing all the work.
Yeah, but
with Iggy trying to be the charismatic front man that holds your attention, while the musicians themselves aren't really doing that much.
But at the same time, they are very groove oriented.
100%. 100%.
And it's not the lo-fi that you would have found with the Black Flag. You're right. The instruments are all good. And they did record this with everybody in the studio at the same time. So it really
did they
was
really? I didn't realize that.
What they sounded like on stage. That's the sound that they wanted to capture. They said, no, we need everybody in here. This is how this band works. Because they are playing off of Iggy. The singer really is the leader of this band. He really does pull them in whatever direction that they're going.
They're very much like the Doors. And in fact, when we talked about the Doors, one of the things I said was Morrison was one of those front men that was so charismatic and held your attention so much that I don't know if the Doors would have ever become the Doors had they not had Morrison out there in front holding everybody's attention. And I think, frankly, in some ways, you almost say that about the Stooges. I don't, like, they're not bad musicians, but I don't know that this album ever gets the attention that it does without Iggy Pop being out in front.
Correct. You're right.
Agreed. Oh, totally.
Iggy Pop is this band. This is why who the hell knows how he's still alive at 76. especially after everything we just mentioned.
Clean
And those
living,
are only
kids.
a handful. Those are just a handful of the stories about Iggy Pop.
Oh yeah, that we had to whittle that down from a very long list, just so the listeners know. No, it wasn't just a couple of things.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a sample. Yeah, that was a sample. The Whitman.
A
The Whitman
Wiggler.
sampler. Oh my God.
The other thing about these guys too is they were, I mentioned that they really started more as a psychedelic act. Nobody was calling these guys punk at the time. They were really into psychedelic music at the 60s. And you really hear that, especially on the very last track of this album. There's a track called L.A. Blues. It misleading title because, man, there's no blues here.
No.
It is almost all avant-garde modern jazz, where it reminded me, as I was listening to it, it reminded me of Bitches Brew, Miles Davis. Because it is just basically 3 minutes of random noise with Iggy kind of wailing over the whole thing.
I'm going to admit that was a hard listen.
It's a very hard listen, but my observation was, again, because a lot of these songs find a groove and settle into it and just repeat it over and over and over again, oddly enough, you get to that LA Blues, it's a hard listen, and yet it is simultaneously the most musically interesting thing on the album.
It is.
Should I make the plug of we actually discussed Bitches Brew?
We did discuss Bitches Brew.
Yes, on the show
since you're-
called Podcast Under Siege.
I don't know how you remember that part.
Find it on our website. Get it wherever podcasts are sold.
You'll love my Steven Seagal thing.
Yes, that's where the name came from. Yep.
All right, so what else? Anything else about the Stooges?
This album pushed boundaries of what rock music could do and what could be, embracing the chaos, the distortion, and just the unfiltered emotion. It packs a punch. It's not really, like you said, it's not punk because it's still that transition from the psychedelic because of all the experimentation, the longer songs that just kind of go with that riff and make so much noise. I mean, there's some points all I can think of is Interstellar Overdrive.
Yeah.
The way they're just clanging out shit.
It was influential. I mean, it's not punk in the vein of Black Flag, but it is a true statement that you don't get Black Flag without this first. I mean, to the point where Henry Rollins loves this album. And Henry Rollins actually said that when he joined Black Flag, the other guys in the band gave him a copy of the Stooges and another band called the MC5 from the Detroit area that the Stooges did a lot of shows with. The guys in Black Flag gave Henry Rollins a copy of MC5 and the Stooges and said, listen to this, learn it, love it, because if you don't get this, you're not going to get what we're doing.
We got the song 1970, and at the end of it, Iggy, like 20 or 30 times, says, I feel all right. I feel all right. And then Funhouse starts. And in the first 2 minutes, Iggy's saying, I feel all right. I feel all right. I'm like, wait, did I'm wondering if the tracks changed. I'm like, wait. So my takeaway from the album was, well, Iggy feels all right.
Drugs, kids, drugs. That's what made this album, drugs.
It's that second hit.
No shit, right? I was like, oh man, if there's a real takeaway here, it's like, drugs. They can do some strange things sometimes. You know?
The other just one more thing I'll say about this. The other observation I had while listening to this is the exact same observation I had with the B-52s. You had to be there. I would imagine that a lot of these songs, if you're in the club and in the pit and you're slam dancing or moshing or whatever the fuck, I mean, probably they weren't doing either one of those things yet, but if you are listening to this band, I would absolutely listen to the shit out of this in a club. It's a little harder to sit down and listen to and appreciate as an album.
I think there is that feel where you're in the club and you're probably, if you're smart, only on one hit and enjoying Iggy's theatrics.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And stand back because you're in the splash zone. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Just stay back from the vomit zone or the blood zone or whatever it is.
You know what? Iggy inspired Gallagher.
Yeah.
Shall we move on to the antithesis of Iggy Pop?
Please, let's get away from that.
So we move on to Otis Redding.
Iggy spewed and Otis blew. Yeah.
Yes. Well done. Well done. Wow. So Otis Redding is considered the king of soul, with major influences on him being Little Richard and Sam Cooke, which both play prominent roles in his life. So going with these monikers, James Brown is the godfather of soul. Aretha Franklin is the Queen of Soul. Marvin Gaye is the Prince of Soul. Patti LaBelle is the Godmother of Soul. And Gladys Knight is the Empress of Soul. Didn't know all these titles existed, and yet here they are. Otis, my man. I always go back to Animal House. Otis Redding, born in Dawson, Georgia, moved to Macon when he was two. Not by himself, his family moved him. And it wasn't like some young kid immigrant child that came over on the boat, self-made by the time they're 5 years old kind of thing. The Corleone.
10 years old, time for me to branch out.
At 10 years old, Otis was making $6 a week singing gospel songs on the local Macon radio station. He already had this talent at a young age. There was 1 year or so, he won 15 consecutive weeks at a teen show, making $5 each at that. And when he's 15, he has to drop out of school because he needed to support his family. His father had contracted tuberculosis, so he couldn't work that much. Otis was pretty much doing everything for the family. He worked as a well digger, a gasoline station attendant, and occasionally as a musician. He gets a gig as a backup. He's in the backup band for Little Richard, and then he becomes a member of this Pat T. Cake, so Patty Cake, and the Mighty Panthers, and they toured the U.S. on what was called the Chitlin Circuit. Basically, it was just a group of venues that were African-American friendly during the era of segregation, because there weren't a lot of clubs that they could actually play. At one point, the guitarist for this band, Johnny Jenkins, left-handed blues slinger, he needs a lift to Memphis because, he doesn't have a driver's license, and, Otis does. He gets down there to do some session works at Stax Studios for Booker T and the MGs, another band that plays a prominent role in Otis's life. The sessions that Johnny does with Booker T, they're not really going anywhere, and Booker goes, hey, why don't y'all listen to Otis and let him sing a couple songs? So he records 2 songs, These Arms of Mine and Hey Hey Baby. And These Arms of Mine is one of his one of the top successful
Amazing
songs,
song.
probably right behind Dock of the Bay when people know of Otis. They released this on a single, which, kiddies, this was a 45 back then. When we say single, they released it on it's a smaller album, LP album. So from that, he gets the album contract. They hear this. They can hear how just beautifully he sings. He is just absolutely amazing and smooth. I mean, he truly is the godfather of soul. Or no, the King of Soul, sorry. Godfather is James Brown. He gets the album contract, does his first album, then he does his second album. The only reason I mention the second album is I love the fucking bravado here. The name of the album is The Great Otis Redding Sings Soul Ballads. I don't know if that was something he did or something.
I think that's probably the marketing company or the marketing department.
I mean, it's definitely marketing. So we get to the third album. This is a mixture of contemporary R&B songs with 3 songs that were written by Otis and 3 songs that were written by Sam Cooke. Sadly, Sam died months before this recording even started. The amazing thing, too, about this recording is 10 of the 11 songs were recorded in 24 hours.
Ridiculous.
Right there at Stax Studio in Memphis.
Yeah.
That's hard to believe, especially when you're trying... I mean, the band must be that tight. And Dave, I think you actually added the note, too, that he was backed by Booker T and the MGs.
Yeah, I mean, this album, one of the things I noted as a plus about this album is you not only get Otis Redding, who is just one of the all-time great soulful voices in history, but the backing on this, he's got Booker T and the MGs, he's got the Marquis, he's got even a young Isaac Hayes is playing keyboard on this. So just the backing musicians, this is an incredibly tight studio combo. 2 of the guys that play with him, guitarist Stephen Cropper and bassist Donald Duck Dunn. Okay, these are 2 future members of the Blues Brothers band. And they do play Otis Redding songs. And interestingly enough, it's the Blues Brothers that were a gateway for me to finding old Otis Redding, for going and seeking out older James Brown, for going and finding all these other R&B artists. I fully believe that there are gateway bands out there, and the Rolling Stones being one of them too, because on this album, he covers Satisfaction. It's full circle. The Stones reintroduced the blues to America, and then Otis Redding covers
satisfaction. And really, it's like the biggest compliment to them that someone as talented as Otis Redding and this band to say, oh yeah, we're going to do a Stones cover.
Do a Stones cover. And they had the balls to take sort of the iconic Keith Richards intro riff and completely replace it with horns too, which shouldn't work, but it worked fantastically.
But it worked. Exactly.
Probably a lot of it has to do with the fact that the Stones themselves were so influenced by blues and R&B that it's not like these are totally uncomplimentary acts, because they really were influencing each other in a lot of ways.
It's very true. And up until this album, I had no idea that it was Otis Redding that wrote Respect.
Yeah, because everybody associates that with Aretha. Yeah, exactly. And Otis Redding was a guy who wrote it.
I did not know that.
Well, there you go. There you go.
And I did read his death, another artist by plane crash, a small plane trying to land in Wisconsin, and they drop into a lake. And there's actually a survivor.
Oh, really?
And he was holding on to a seat cushion, and he couldn't save anybody else because he didn't know how to swim.
Oh, wow. I didn't know anybody survived that crash, actually.
And that's how we lost Otis. It was like minutes before they were supposed to land.
Lesson of the day, kids. When the flight attendant says your seat cushion can be used as a flotation device, she's not kidding.
Listen to your flight attendant.
Even if it smells like old farts.
Yes, exactly.
Those farts may save your life, children.
Overall, this was just one incredibly impressive album.
Yeah,
and even though it says covers, it's not an anthology. It's not a greatest hits. And to the point to where a lot of artists at this time, it's like they were doing covers. I mean, we talked about Frank Sinatra. Yeah, he didn't write any of those songs, but Otis wrote 3 of these, and he was actually, in a way, sort of promoting the other artists of the day.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that goes a long way. Yeah, these are people that he revere. And like I said earlier, Sam Cooke and Little Richard were his heroes.
Well, it's the musical community too was very tight knit back in those days, especially amongst the black musicians, because they were so discriminated against that they had to stick together, and they did.
Right. The other thing I love about Otis is, I mean, I said earlier, sort of one of the all-time great soul voices, and I really do believe that. But the man put in energy into everything. Even if it was a slow ballad, you could hear the energy and the focus that he was putting into his performance. There's nothing, he's not sleepwalking his way through any of this stuff. James Brown had the moniker hardest working man in soul in music. I don't know if I agree with that. I honestly think there's an argument that of this era, Otis was probably the hardest working guy, because he really thought through, how do I make each one of these songs my own? Even if it's just a slow love song, how do I put 110% into it? You could hear, like I mean, you talked about These Arms of Mine, which I agree with you. I think it's probably the best song he ever recorded. He's crooning, but every single note, like you can almost hear the beads of sweat on his forehead as he focuses on hitting exactly what that song needs while he's singing. Unbelievable.
He captures the moment.
100%.
He does that incredibly well. He was one of the best soul voices out there, and I think every other singer down the line can all look back and go, oh yeah, we learned from Otis. As much as he revered Little Richard and Sam Cooke, Sam Cooke's got his own way of doing things, and even when he does the What a Wonderful World This Could Be, I've always loved that song. And I mean, this version just... wow.
Yeah. I generally kind of hate that song because it's so overdone. But his version...
But it wasn't at the time. I mean, yeah.
His version, Sam Cooke's version, Sam King. I don't know who that is.
Yeah.
Sam Cooke's version, Louis Armstrong's version, too. I love that one. So.
Oh, that's a different song, though, the Louis Armstrong.
What a Wonderful World?
No.
Yeah, you're thinking
two different
thinking
songs.
about I See Trees of Green. That's a different song.
I'm bad. Oh yeah, you're right. I am. Wow.
This is don't know much about his
right
story.
It is called What a Wonderful World, and it's a different song. Yeah.
Son of a bitch.
That's why I strung out the title.
Oops, I own that.
I mean, there's just I really can't go into too much. This is really just a sensational album. This is the one you do put on at the dinner party.
It is. It
is.
It is. Now, there's not a lot to criticize here, but the one thing I will say is we're talking about greatest albums of all time, right? I don't know, other than being a really great collection of very well performed songs, I don't know what else this thing has going for it. Like I've never heard anybody say Yeah, Otis Blue is what inspired da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da.
Right.
You are not wrong.
It's a great soul album from an era of great soul albums, but I'm going to be honest, I'm not 100% sure I know what it's doing on the Rolling Stone list.
Agreed.
It's a good representation.
The fact they put anthologies on their top 500 list was kind of weird, and we discussed that before because there are other anthologies that was the same thing. Al Green comes to mind. They did the same thing.
I agree, but we did. I mean, in fairness, this is a little different. When we talked about Al Green, it was somebody pulling together a collection of recordings from elsewhere and putting them together in an album, and we said, well, that's a little unfair because that wasn't conceived as an album. This was actually, in fairness, this was actually conceived as an album. This wasn't a collection of recordings from elsewhere. This was, they went into the studio and yeah, it's other people's songs, but from start to finish, this was a comprehensive work from the get-go.
I would agree. No, that is the difference between this and with the Al Green. It was a greatest hits, and yet he has 2 or 3 other albums in the top 500. I'm like, no, you either have an anthology to represent him and none of the others, or you just pick the others.
Right.
And the difference when we had Ray Charles was, it was a collection of all of his songs throughout the 50s because they were not on albums. They were all singles put together. So that's where I'm okay with it.
Okay, agreed.
Because they were all released as singles because that was
how the music industry worked at the time, yeah.
It is. That's
correct.
How they did it, children.
Correct.
They did it with their dicks out.
No other way unless you're Iggy.
Well,
and then you do it spectacularly,
do.
apparently.
Involve body fluids.
All right, so are we ready to vote?
I think so.
Okay, all right, Scott.
We've kicked this horse around. I love both of these albums. They were both really good. Certain titles on the Otis Redding album notwithstanding. Oh, me and my mouth sometimes. We're a real party. I'm going to give this to Funhouse because fuck the Stooges, yeah. Praise Satan.
I'm second, and kind of to Dave's point is, where do you hear about this in the future? And Iggy Pop, yeah, we spent a lot of time. I wouldn't really say fangirling. We've just done a lot of appreciation for Iggy Pop. And quite honestly, I think we could make the case that the Stooges and Iggy, without them, there's a lot that just does not happen. So I'm giving this one to the Stooges. Cool. Dave?
Yeah, I mean, my vote doesn't matter because you guys are on the same page. But for what it's worth, it would be unanimous. Because for the reason you just said, which is, love the Otis album, just don't know what the grander influence of it is. Whereas with the Stooges, it's very easy to sort of trace that line of what it led to later. So
there's a very distinct lineage there.
Yep. And this time we are aligned with Rolling Stone. The Stooges were at 94 and Otis Blue was at 178, which I think we would all agree is probably a little too high. It's good.
Yeah, I don't know if it's that good. Okay.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's definitely too high in my book because, like I said, I'm not sure I fully understand why it was on the list in the first place. So,
all right. So you ready to hear what we're going to be covering next time?
Tell us, Billy. Tell us.
All right. In round 1, it will be Rush with Moving Pictures, and they will be taking on Paul Simon with his album Graceland.
Wow, really?
In the second round, just to keep things completely lopsided, we have the Wu-Tang Clan with Enter the Wu-Tang, nice. And in parentheses, 36 Chambers. And they will be taking on Van Halen with their first album from 1978. It will absolutely be an interesting matchup.
Kind of
indeed.
An epic matchup. Wu-Tang Clan against Van Halen. Dave, are you there?
I am. I'm just shutting up because I know we're having communication issues.
No, but it's more fun when you talk because we don't know what you're saying and we have to think about what it might be. And my brain.
You guys were doing fine. Something about Tang.
Bang wang.
All right, folks.
Tang or that song
let's hit the button, shall we?
Press the button, Frank.
Press the button.
Bye.
Bye.
Hello?
Anybody
there?
Yeah, no, I'm here. I don't know.
I don't hear Corey.
No, he froze up and then his video dropped altogether.
I was yeah.
And I wasn't looking at the screen, and for a second I was like, did he have a heart attack?
I'll just turn off.
Oh,
here, I'll turn off my camera.
No, it's not you. He just said his system just crashed.
Oh shit.
He's rebooting right now.
Oh.
Shit, that means
that
means he probably lost his recording.
Hey, it's awesome. Oh shit. Oh, maybe not. maybe not.
I don't even know
awesome.
what you're talking about, but I love that intro.
Well, shit.
Hey, it's
no,
awesome.
This means we can fucking. Well, it is kind of awesome because we can talk about him now and we can do a song. Yeah. So yeah.
You're grabbing the guitar. Your camera's off. I can't.
Oh yeah, I did. I turned the camera off and there we go. Corey's computer went down just now. Corey's computer fucking crashed. Take it, Dave. Put it where Steven Seagal did. Stop. No, wait, fuck. I'm putting the wrong button. Oh.